small steps. I guess the question I have is, oftentimes when we're going through these paths, there's a point where we hit our lowest point, and then we have an aha moment to move forward. Did you have something like that? I'm just curious.
How much time do we have? I think my entire life has been full of a lot of aha moments. But I do want to share one, which actually I thought about as I was watching the movie. And so many powerful moments, and that was incredible, wasn't it? Can you just have one other round? I mean, I'm sure everybody will talk to you later. But that's incredible. You were such a gift to the world, Jose. But one thing that you said in there that about facing the fear that the biggest fear that you have, right, and looking at it in the eyes. And then towards the end, when you talked about loving that little boy that you were once and still are inside. You know, we all have that inner child. We all have that little version of us that lives inside of us. And I think a big journey for ourselves, no matter who we are, no matter what our story is, but the biggest journey we're on is to learn to accept ourselves, learn to love ourselves. And for some of us, in fact all of us, I think, have gone through some form of trauma or another. It's to also learn to love those traumatized versions of ourselves. You know, like trauma does break us, whether we grow up with abuse or bullying or being rejected or learning to, hate ourselves because that's what the world teaches us. Those things break us. And I think the way to acceptance from others or love from others actually starts with love and acceptance for yourself. And I want to share a story about that. So my first book has a picture of me on the cover. And it's actually my wedding picture. I was 17 years old. And I am sitting in my red and gold bridal gown. Beside me standing is my ex-husband, who is covered by the book title. So when I was finishing writing the book, and then my editor sent me that cover. She said, "This is the cover that we've come up with." And I looked at it, and I instantly felt this visceral reaction of, hell no. That is not the cover. I don't want this weak, powerless, naive version of me on the cover. I am this powerful woman who published this story in Toronto Life, who speaks on stages, who wears power suits and heels, and excelling in my career. This is who I am. This is who I want to be known as, not as her. That used to be me some time ago, like whatever, many years ago. I'm not her anymore. She's not me anymore, right? And my editor said, "Samra, just take a couple of days and think about it, and we'll talk again." And that weekend, I was speaking at a graduation ceremony for a CEGEP college in Quebec, which is all grade 12, grade 13. All 17-year-olds, same age as I was in that picture. And I got up on stage and I delivered this talk about learning to love ourselves and accepting ourselves and, all these things. And I was sitting on stage while all these kids are coming up and getting their diplomas and giving me high fives and taking selfies. And I started thinking, if any of these kids went through what I did at that age, if what happened to me happens to any of these kids, will I be ashamed of them? Will I hate them? Will I not want to celebrate them? Will I not want to have them on the cover of a book? No. So why am I so ashamed of myself at that age? that's what it was. It was shame and hate towards that version of me. Whereas all she deserved and wanted was love and compassion, not from others, but from me at this point. Because those other people are already out of my life. And then I went back to my hotel that night, and I pulled up that picture on my phone. And I sat and cried for an hour. And all I said, I looked at that picture, I looked that girl in the eye, and all I said was, thank you. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for going on. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for believing. Thank you for taking each step that you did, because if you hadn't done that, I would not even exist today. And I owe my life to you. And I called my editor the next morning and I said, if it's between me and her, she's the real hero. And she's the one who deserves to be on that cover. Because I'm just a product of what she had done. And I think that moment was a huge moment in my life, because that was finally when I started letting go of the shame and started loving the girl that I once was. And that girl is still inside me, and I love her more and more every day. And I think that has been the biggest breakthrough for my healing.
I have a question for you. So going through that documentary obviously has a lot of, it can be emotionally overwhelming, it can be, so also healing. The question I have for you is actually kind of, I'm curious, is there anything in doing this process and going through that documentary that still you feel is left unresolved? And if so, how do you manage that?
I'd like to start by acknowledging how powerful Sama's answer was now. Wow. I was blown away, thank you. So I would say, hey, the filmmaker, who we also know, Josiane, when she told me that she had to come with me to Lebanon to film some conversations with my parents, I said no. And then I told her, can't you just film me on stage, here, there? And then she told me, I'm not going to make a 1 hour long marketing video for you. There needs to be an actual story in the film. And so we go, and the day before those conversations with my parents, I go up to her, I say, hey, there's no way I can have these conversations with them. In my mind, I was literally thinking that they were going to get up and walk away in the middle of those conversations. And the fact that they did not was a reminder that sometimes our thoughts are so divorced from reality. They're so not an accurate metric of what is the truth. So we had these conversations. It was very liberating, Now, have we talked about having them since? No. But it was very powerful to have them. And oftentimes, after screenings, I had people come up to me and say that they have their own conversations that they need to have with people in their lives. And now I can understand that you might not have the chance to have a bunch of cameras in a room to have those conversations, but having had them, I can say that I would recommend having them. I'd like to also comment on something that Samara said about the relationship with the old self, with our younger self. I find that growth and healing are not the same thing. I would define growth as implementing a new behavior in a new environment. So if I'm here, I'm in Canada, I am far from home and far from the old self, I would define growth as new behaviors in this new environment. I would define healing as the new behavior in the old environment. So if I go home and I have to face the past, I have to be in the rooms where my younger self was. The challenge of implementing these new behaviors in that old environment, I think, is what leads to healing.
You're talking about the fact that your parents have these conversations. It kind of struck me because there are conversations I want to have with my parents, and now with my mom who's 80, and I'm not able to have that conversation anymore. Like, she doesn't understand some of the things that I want to talk to her about, and so that opportunity is missed. Still have a chance with my father potentially, but it's very powerful when you think about that, and I think it's good to have those conversations. The other question I have for you, and then I'll go to Q&A audience, is I talk about vulnerable storytelling all the time. It's a big thing. I always talk about, I share stories of all the different challenges I've had, from parenting to health to all those different things. But I currently, and I'm technically on this panel, when I was a moderator, not only as a moderator, but also somebody who talks about resilience and courage and persevering and things like that. But I'm feeling a little bit small. Like your stories are so large and powerful, and so for me it's like, well, I don't know whether mine are as good to share because maybe they're smaller. But my hope is that by you sharing these big stories, most people will be willing to share their smaller stories. So I guess I wanted to ask either of you, because there's this whole comparisonitis, right? And so I'm feeling that right now, honestly. I was going to tell people one of my big challenges, but I was like, it's not good. These guys are amazing. Let's just go with these guys. So, what are your thoughts about people out there who are thinking that, well, my problems and my challenges aren't that big a deal. Maybe they're first world problems. I don't know. So, what's your take on that? Because your challenge is so big, and we feel like we can't really share ours, or maybe we shouldn't.
I'll start off because this is something actually I talk about quite often, and I share about this in my new book too. We live in a world of trauma Olympics. we literally live in a world that teaches us to compete. Who has the bigger story? Even the words we're using right now, the big story, the small story. Trauma is not about what happened to us. Trauma is about the effect that what happened to us had on us. So as now a psychiatrist, or a training psychiatrist, I hear stories from people that are horrendous for me to listen to, but they're not in distress enough, right? So that's not trauma, even though the story might be like, oh my God, everybody would be traumatized by it. On the flip side, there could be something simple that happened to somebody, or seemingly simple, that could leave them traumatized, that could leave them broken. That is what their work is to heal from, or heal with. You don't heal from trauma, you heal with it. You don't heal from adversity, you heal with it. You don't move on from adversity and grief, you move on with these things, right? So, what I would say to that is, everyone's experience is unique. Everyone's experience is subjective. So honor yourself, honor your story, honor your journey. There is no comparison. And here's the thing about comparison. We're often comparing our insides to everybody's outsides. We don't know what others are going through. Like I went on stage today at TD Bank across the street in front of thousands of people. And just before going on stage, I was in the bathroom dealing with my imposter syndrome and giving myself a pep talk. No one sees that bit, right? And it's because I've grown up being told that as a woman, my dreams are not valid, I'm not capable, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not equal, blah, blah, blah. And while those people are out of my life, those messages are still imprinted in my psyche, in my blueprint. So I need to work with that. And to me, that is more traumatic than the few times that I faced physical abuse. To me, those messages are the trauma that I deal with today. Even though if I tell somebody the story, they would be like, oh, well, you know, when you were almost killed by your ex-husband, that must have been the trauma. I'm like, I don't even think about that anymore. I actually go, oh yeah, that happened. So again, I'll say, honor your journey, honor your story. Get rid of this weird trauma Olympics. So you've been through so much, I haven't been through enough. Like why? Trauma and adversity are not a prerequisite to resilience. So we need to get out of this mindset where we compare and we contrast and we keep on invalidating ourselves in the process. Your feelings, your story, and your journey is equally as valid as mine or Jose's or anyone else's. And you gotta be that champion for yourself. That's to you, Bob.
I am familiar with the story that you've shared before. In fact, I think it's the one I had interviewed you about, I think for my book, right? So, I do think that if we hold back, it is very binary. It's either we hold back or we don't. Either we feel like we are stuck in a prison, or we don't. And the exact details don't really matter. I it reminds me of a quote by Rumi that goes, it goes, why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open? I think sometimes we need help from other people who can hold our hands as we walk out that the open door of the prison that we kept ourselves in. I'm sure the whole audience wants to also hear Bobby's, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Let's go to some Q&A. So,